Good afternoon, everyone, and Erev Tov to those who may be joining us from the land of Israel. I am so excited to be able to be here this afternoon with you, especially with my very dear friend, Rabbi Nir Barkin, who has agreed to stay up very late for us. It may be 4 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States right now, but it is 11 p.m. Late at night in Modi'in, in the midway point between Tel Aviv and Yerushalayim, where Rabbi Barkin is the senior rabbi of Kehilat YOZMA. Kehilat YOZMA is probably one of the largest and most dynamic of all of the Reform congregations in Israel. And that is a testament to Nir's leadership and that of his colleague, Rabbi Phil Nadel, and Rabbi Kineret Shiryon, who founded that congregation as one of the early Reform rabbis in the state of Israel and the first woman rabbi in the state of Israel to lead a congregation. Nir is an incredibly important friend and a very, very dear colleague and an incredibly important leader in the Reform movement and in the larger Israeli society. Rabbi Barkin flew drones during his service in the IDF and in intelligence, and then was a shliach to Wisconsin, where he discovered his Judaism and came to the Hebrew Union College and was ordained and has served in many different positions in the Israeli movement for progressive Judaism, but most of his service in Kehilat YOZMA. Temple Bethel and YOZMA have had a warm and rich partnership for many decades now. And for those of you who have been blessed to join us when we have taken our congregational trips to Israel, know that we are always blessed when we get to spend Shabbat, and we are hosted with such warmth by the members of YOZMA, and we're just so grateful to have this opportunity to share this kesher, to share this connection with you, Nir, and with your congregation. I know that I speak for, I think, almost everyone in our congregation when I say, in the words of Yehuda Halevi, Libi b'mizrach v'ani b'sof ha'ma'arav, my heart is in the east and I am at the edge of the west. Those of us who are here at the edge of the west are looking at the eruption of violence in Israel in these last days and weeks with tremendous heartache and fear and concern for you and for all of our friends and relatives who make Israel their home, all those among our people that are continuing to build what we call Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, the first flowering of our redemption in the birth of the modern state of Israel. At the same time, we cannot help but feeling an incredible sense of angst and worry for all of the humanitarian anguish that is shared on, I think, both sides of this terrible conflict. And what we really wanted to do today is to give the members of our community and those who will be watching a chance to be in Israel there with you. Not only hopefully our presence as you look at the gallery view on your screen there that you see more than 50 households in our congregation who are joining us on Zoom, and many more who will join us by YouTube and Facebook, to know that our love is with you and our support is there with you, but to learn from you as to what is the lived experience of Israelis in this time and the sources of the conflict. You know, it's so hard for us, I think, in America, because depending on what network you turn on or what magazine you turn to, you're not always sure if you're getting more than a valence truth. And what we hoped is to have your truth. And we recognize that the way that you experience what's happening now is your experience, but it's, you know, I think one thing to hear a talking head tell us what it is that we're looking at, and to have somebody who is there on the ground, the Sabra, who has given so much of his life to our people, to us as Reform Jews, and to the state of Israel, to have a chance to learn from you. So Nir, if we can just begin, tell us about today. What happened today? Tell us how your day started. Tell us what your congregation experienced today. Tell us what is happening in Israel today.
Thank you, Rabbi Dan. This is a true privilege for me to be at this time going forward to a ceasefire, hopefully in 3 hours, and to share the experience that I had, my congregation had, my family had during the last 11 days. But if I'm not exaggerating, it may also reflect the year and a half that passed since March or February of 2020. But first, allow me to say hello to so many of you whom I know for so many years, of course, including your rabbis. And just by scanning quickly faces, I see my friend Morris Plow on the screen, whom I know for more than 15 years and appreciated many, many, many others. I would also like to congratulate Rabbi for your 25th anniversary, which I heard that you now deserve the did not drown or did not die admiration by accepting the DD honor from the Hebrew Union College. So congregants and friends, from now on, you have to call Rabbi Dan, Rabbi Dr. Dan Levin. So Rabbi Doctor, allow me to start and share some of my perspective on what's going on. And basically, as I do in my own congregation, we'll study together. We'll learn together. It's your questions will lead to more and more understanding on our end, because like someone who lives in this pond for so many years, 54 and a half, we must acknowledge the fact that we kind of not see everything that is around us as good as you can see when you talk to us and when you ask the questions. Let me begin with yet another Israeli cabinet discussion, which ended recently, that approved the ceasefire to begin at 2 a.m. Israeli time in 3 hours from now. It was a unanimous vote of the Israeli cabinet to approve the ceasefire, and one would ask herself or himself, what brings the Israeli government to make this decision at this point after 11 days of fighting against Hamas in the Gaza Strip? And what does it mean for us to agree to such a peaceful or extending our hand to a terrorist organization which shoots at our civilians, at our parents and children and babies all over Israel? My assumption was already, I would say, 9 days ago, 2 days into the fighting, my assumption was that it will take between a week and 2 weeks of fighting until we reach a ceasefire. It's not because I'm clever, and definitely not because I'm a prophet, because the prophecy is given to the dummies, as we all know. It's just because I've experienced endless circles of fighting, rounds of fighting between Israel and its Palestinian neighbors over the last 54 years. I've shared with your rabbi yesterday, I think, a letter that I wrote and was talking about my first 6 months as a baby, growing up or being born in Jerusalem just before the 6-Day War. And when the 6-Day War broke out, I was just an infant, a young baby. I wasn't a year old yet, and my mom had to sit with her back to the one of the building's pillars, because there were not sealed rooms at that time, and to hold me in her hands after giving me anesthesia, so I will be more calm when the shootings of the Jordanians will come over and try to hit the Israelis or the Jewish Israelis citizens of West Jerusalem. So my fighting as a baby started very early. I would even share with you and say that it began all too early for a human being, because those experiences that start when you're so young carve your soul and make who you are to come in later years. We moved to live in a kibbutz in the northern border of Israel when I was 2.5 years old. And the reason for that was that my parents got divorced. Now, this is not unusual today. 50% or so of the couples are getting divorced. But the reason for my parents to get divorced in 1968 was because my father came from the war, from the Six-Day War, with a PTSD. Well, this is not a reason to get divorced either. But at that time, in those years, PTSD was not treated well, and people knew very little about those symptoms that kept the people awake at night. So my mother picked up the two children and moved to the northern border of Israel, and we lived under the attrition war in the late 1960s and the beginning of the 1970s. This follows with the Yom Kippur War and on and on and on. So when I say that I grew up in this pond, and sometimes it's hard for me to look and understand the wider perspective, I would also say that when a war like this breaks out, you anticipate or you feel it in your guts that it will be over within a week or 2 weeks from the beginning. Now, what do we achieve? What did we achieve? And I want to state it very clearly at this point. I want to state it very clearly because the two powers that are fighting each other, on one hand, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and on the other hand, the terrorist group of the Hamas or the Islamic Jihad, are not equal powers. It's clear that Israel is so much stronger and can cause so much more damage to the other side than they can cause us. But you know, if any of you, and I assume some of you, if not each and every one of you, has experienced in his or her past a mosquito buzzing in your ear, and the fact that you can even wake up at night from this buzz, and when it bites you, it's really not nice. I mean, it's an itchy feeling that you know accompanies you for quite a long time. It's not going to kill you, most likely. The chances for a mosquito to kill you are very low, but on the other hand, it's not comfortable. Let's put it this way. So the powers are not equal, which puts a lot of burden on the Israeli side. On another perspective, the Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, has a vision, a very clear vision, which they are not shy to express. Israel, under the current leadership, and I'm not saying to which government I'm supporting or not, but the current leadership of Israel does not have a vision of where we would like this conflict to go. So let's state what the vision of the Hamas, of the Palestinians in Gaza, the leadership there are willing very much to take Israel and throw it into the sea. The Hamas, whether it will take a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, year, 10 years, or 100 years, has a vision. They don't want to see us here. There's no chance for them to sit around a round table and discuss peace. This is not their vision. On the other hand, from our perspective, from the Israeli perspective, we do not have a vision whatsoever. Because demolishing the Hamas, while it's easy from a military perspective, with all the power that Israel has, also costs a lot of human lives, which we are very careful about. And on the other hand, some would think that the Hamas regime in the Gaza Strip is the most comfortable one for Israel, and therefore, a round after round after round of fighting over the years is something which Israel can absorb, but not go any further to any clear vision of what it wants from the Gaza Strip. So when two powers that are so unequal, on one hand, let's put it this way, Israel can demolish Gaza within 24 hours, but wouldn't do that under no circumstances. A, because we're Jews, B, because we have the international community, and B, the Hamas has a clear vision of what it wants from us, meaning just get out of here, and we are not sure what the clear message or the clear vision of Israel has when it comes to the Hamas, because quiet is not a vision, is a tactic. Israel wants quiet. But you can achieve quiet from one round of battle to another round of fighting, but this is not constant. So at 2 a.m. in 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 45 minutes from now, the ceasefire will most likely begin. And my friend Karine, who's on the call now, and I and our families and friends will clearly know that as soon as the Hamas is getting out of the shelters, they'll try immediately to build the underground town and anything that can harm Israel in the next round. They have a vision. They don't want us here. And it's not a logic vision. And they're not looking for a logic vision. They have time. If it won't happen tomorrow, it will happen in 10 years or in 100 years from now. They have a vision, they have a destination, they have a vector. We don't.
So thinking about that larger context which you shared, which I think adds a layer of complexity. If you've ever been to Israel with me, or you've taken a class with me, the thing that I always share is it's complicated. It's probably one of the biggest Gordian knots there is. And every time you think you understand the conflict, there's another layer of complexity that lends, I think, a sense of, I'm not even sure how to say the right words, just a sense of overwhelming goodness gracious beyond that. So tell us, though, what happened that triggered the most recent round of violence? And what were the underlying issues beyond Hamas's vision, as you discuss, of wanting to illogically seek to eradicate the state of Israel? What was happening? You know, we're hearing so much about Sheikh Jarrah, and we're hearing about barricades in the Damascus Gate, and we're hearing about incursions by Israeli troops into the Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, and we're hearing about rockets, and we're hearing about so many different things. Tell us a little bit from, you know, just to give us, to break through some of the noise, what really triggered, what are the things that really happened that led up to this convulsion?
Well, I'll try. And if you have questions, please put them on the chat so I can direct my answer towards what really interests you. When you sit on a explosive barrel, you're not surprised when the barrel explodes. Now, when I was in high school, some not too many years ago, I remember my history teacher teaching us about the causes for the breakout of the First World War. And he used this idiom of what lit the ammunition barrel or the bomb that caused First World War that was so tragic and terrible. And I think that when you look for triggers, Rabbi, this is a tricky thing because you will find them. Yes, Jews were asking to return to Jewish homes in Sheikh Jarrah, which is an Arab neighborhood in the midst of Jerusalem. It's not in the outskirts. It's not in the West Bank. It's within Jerusalem. Sheikh Jarrah is a community like Talbiya, for those of you who know, as close to the center of Jerusalem as many of the other neighborhoods. And Jews who lived there before 1948 claimed to hold the homes back and begin this settlement there. It's not a settlement. It's a Jewish residency in the middle of an Arab neighborhood in Jerusalem. So we can take this as a trigger. And then, and I must admit that I'm going to say something which is a clergy, as a liberal clergy, is very hard for me to say, but I will still say it, and I'll say that I feel uncomfortable saying it, is the fact that every year, since I'm very young, since I understand something, the month of Ramadan is an explosive month, regardless of what Jews do or don't do in the country. That can be a second trigger. You bring a lot of young Palestinians to El Aqsa, to the Dome of the Rock, and they charge each other. They're young. You would call them mob. You can call them congregants. But they charge each other with hatred. So Sheikh Jarrah could be one trigger. The month of Ramadan is another trigger. A third trigger, as Rabbi Dan was referring to, is the fact that there is a group of Jewish people, Orthodox people, that believe that the most sacred place for the Jewish world, for the Jewish religion, the Dome of the Rock, where the temple was founded and served us for hundreds of years, 2,000 years ago, that it is legitimate for them not only to go up the mountain, but also to pray there. Which, of course, the liberals would say, you don't have to put your finger in somebody's eye. And the non-liberals would say, it's a Jewish state. We're the sovereign here. It's the most sacred place for Jews of all places, more than the Western Wall, more than the cave of the Machpelah. And therefore, we're entitled to go there. But this is also a trigger. That's true. But would one need a trigger if he sits on an explosive barrel? I don't think so. I really, really don't think so. And I'm talking to you from the most liberal and pro-Arab perspective that one can have in Israel. And the proof for that is that the Israeli Palestinians, the Israeli Arabs, took advantage over the leadership of the Hamas, claiming that the Jews have to withdraw from the dome, from the Temple Mount, and started riots within the land of it, within the state of Israel, in Lod, in Ramleh, in Haifa, in Akko, in Nazareth. I think that if any group of minorities within the United States, and we've seen a bad example a few months ago, would claim ownership over your capital symbols, you wouldn't be happy about it. And when minorities in Israel, while having a freedom of expressing their religion completely, and having freedom in expressing their religious lives and beliefs, are claiming that Jews are not allowed in Jerusalem in general, or in the Temple Mount in particular, This is a situation where a sovereign state like Israel cannot accept. And no matter where you are on the political ruler or the political arena of the Israeli political map, it doesn't matter. So going back to your question, Rabbi, it's very, very uncomfortable situation to sit on an explosive barrel all your life. I've shared with you just the first 4 years of my life. I can go on and on, losing friends and teachers and colleagues in battles and wars defending Israel. But that's not the point. The point is, what do we do with it? But before we go on and speak about the future, about the hope, let's hear another question.
So I remember when our congregation was visiting Modi'in in 2014, and I had the privilege of sharing Shabbat dinner with you and your family. Your son, who was home for Shabbat, was repacking his bag to go rejoin his unit, which ended up leading him into the war in Gaza that was fought. And I remember how poignantly you expressed the anguish of a parent of having a son serving in an elite unit. I know you can share whatever you can share about what your family is experiencing now, but I think a lot of us are curious to know, what is it like to be an Israeli through this? What's it like to be an Israeli with rocket fire coming in? What's it like to be a family where you have children serving in the IDF, especially in harm's way? And tell us a little bit about your experience just as an Israeli, in addition to being a community leader, and what your congregants are sharing with you about their lived experience in these last difficult days.
Thank you. I promised Karine that I will not put her on the spot, so I'm not going to put her on the spot, because Karine and I are both, Karine, who worked together with me, and I, and she's waving now, hello, are both parents to different soldiers, combat soldiers in the front at the moment. Karine's son is a paratrooper. My son at the moment is in the intelligence field, or field intelligence corps of Israel. All three of my children were serving in front units. My daughter was in the Navy. My middle son, as you, Rabbi, spoke about, was serving in Maglan, which is an elite unit, a combat unit, and he served in the last war 7 years ago. And my little son, my baby son, is now serving in the north, ambushing Hezbollah troops that are trying to invade the border. I would like to begin answering your question by relating to my very dear friend and mentor from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Moshe Katz. I don't know if some of you may know Moshe Katz, or his brother Danny Katz, which I believe lives in your community, somewhere in your community. Moshe visits Israel in normal years. He hasn't been here for 8.5, but in normal years, he visits Israel 2 or 3 times every year. And every time he comes here, and he also lived in Israel for a while, but every time he comes to Israel, he loves it. He enjoys traveling Israel. He loves the wines of Israel and the hummus of Israel, and loves the people of Israel. But every time he comes here, he complains to me about driving in Israel. I mean, with all the 60 years that he lived in and out of Israel, he couldn't get used to the Israeli drivers. And why do I point out at the moment the Israeli drivers? And I would like to distinguish them from those who drive in Rome, who are also very aggressive drivers, to those of you who ever drove in Rome. In Rome, they're just sweet aggressive. In Israel, they're really aggressive. That's the difference between Italians and Israelis. Italians are just sweet. But in Israel, the reason people drive this way is because they're so stressed out. They're so nervous. Now, tell me, say to me, what are you nervous about? At 2 a.m. in the morning, the ceasefire is going to break out, is going to begin, and you will have 3, 4, if you're lucky, 5 years of tranquility and peace. Peace. So why in 3 years from now would you still be aggressive on the road? Why would you be so impatient? And this is something which, and I'm sure with the many people that are on the call right now, you have some psychiatrists and psychologists. Rabbi, am I right? Can you, social workers? So maybe one of you can explain to the others what's post-trauma is all about. So Israelis are post-traumatic. And I must admit that since I became the senior rabbi and executive director of my congregation 4 years ago, succeeding the founding Rabbi Kinneret, only then, and then I was 50 years old, only then I stopped running to the supermarket to equip my sealed room, my shelter at home, with water and cans of food before every circle of fighting like the one we're experiencing now. And why am I not doing it anymore since 4 years ago? Because now I have responsibility over others. And their responsibility over others give me, on one hand, huge stress from that front, but on the other hand, a meaningful thing to do during times of crisis. So Israelis live under huge stress year long. We're very much accommodating the stressful times, including COVID-19, because we are so used to emergency situations in the country. We're so used to moving from peaceful time to a war within 1 hour of, lighting this explosive barrel. I mean, it can be a quiet year during Ramadan. Israelis would do the same. You could theoretically find the same triggers to light this explosive, but nothing would happen. But a year later, like in 2021, like this year, the same triggers that were existing before are happening within an hour notice. And Israelis have to, the word chik-chak? Is it something that is common using in America? Chik-chak is like really quickly, instantly moving from a regular routine to an emergency routine. And I must admit that this pulls the strings, the nerves, and the strings of Israelis to the limit at all times. One can show more peaceful attitude towards the situation. One can show more nervous attitude towards the situation. But all in all, there is a huge stress which is underneath our lives. Luckily, when we see you, and by the way, unfortunately, I haven't seen you for, I think, 18 months. And as a result of that, I gained like 10 pounds because you're not coming to eat our food as we wanted you to. So now you have to come back and come again and enjoy the delicious meals that my congregation and I are serving on Friday nights. If not, we'll meet in another 18 months and I'll gain another 10 pounds. But putting my weight aside, it is important for me to share this inner feeling of stress and distress and trauma, which is accompanying us day in, day out, even in times of peace.
I think I remember Nir when your son was serving in 2014, you had written a little essay about your experience, and you talked about the nights. During the day you have things to do. There's business to attend to. There's things you have to, but at night, every time the car door slams outside, there's a wonder, oh my gosh. And I remember a few years ago, our trip, our congregational trip, we took everybody down to Sderot, which is one of the communities on the border with Gaza. And we toured the town, and we saw how they had built shelters literally into the playground equipment of the different schools, so that children, if they were on the playground and there was an alarm and they had 15 seconds or less to get to a shelter, they could literally just be in the playground. We looked at the back of the police station where they had the husks of these different missiles that had fallen into the community, and then we had lunch there in their little town square, and everybody and our group was nervous because they're eating lunch and they're trying to enjoy their falafel and their shawarma or whatever we were eating, or schnitzel, but they're all kind of looking around and they're all sort of sitting antsy and wondering if something were to happen, where would they go? And part of the reason we went there was because I wanted the people in Sderot to see an American tour bus, for them to realize, hey, we're with you. And the other reason is I wanted people in our group to understand what it's like to live there. And I was sitting with them on the bus as we were leaving. You could see the relief that we were leaving on everyone's face. And I said, so how was lunch? And they're all like, well, the food was good, but we were nervous. And I said, okay, good. Imagine that was lunch every day. Imagine that every day, everywhere you go, you're constantly looking, where's the shelter? Okay, if I had 10, 15 seconds, where am I supposed to run? Is that building open? Is that place there? And to live with the stress, Nir, that you were expressing, I think it's kind of hard for us to imagine. You talk about running when you see the missiles go fill up on supplies for your mamad, your safe room in the house. And we in South Florida know when we see a hurricane warning, we go run and do the same. But a hurricane is a lot different than a missile. And I think that we can relate poorly to that stress that you walk in, even though we kind of know that stress in different ways. And certainly the stress of everybody has been experiencing during these months that we've been kept separate and stuck at home and dealing with a deadly virus that we are afraid is going to afflict those that we love. There was a question that was placed in the chat that
I see the question by Aline Fisher, right?
Yes.
I'll get to the question in a second, but I want to reinforce your words, Rabbi. You were talking about seeking for a shelter during lunch for the past 20 years in Sderot, in the southern region of Israel. And I want, because we're just the two of us on the screen right now, and it's a very intimate discussion, I would like to share with you and have you try to imagine someone who has not slept a full night for 54 years, since he was a year old. We call this group of people, including me, Erim Balayla, awake at night. And this is not to depress you. It is not to tell you that we're miserable. But it is to share with you the facts of life that we go under, live under, our entire life. Two nights ago, I wake up on the side of the bed after I fell off the bed. And Anat, my wife, asks me, what happened? Why are you there? I said, I dreamt about us being in the car during a missile shooting. And what they train you to do is to roll down to the ditch, to the side of the road. So that's what I did. And I fell off the bed 2 nights ago.
Hmm. So
And
Nir,
every night is like this. Every
so
night
there's
has a nightmare.
yeah.
It could be the terrorists that I was exposed to in the north in the early 1970s, or it could be the Hamas that are going after my children, being soldiers in the Israeli Defense Forces. There's always a reason why I wouldn't sleep at night.
So there's a question Nir. Depending on which channel you turn on in the United States, you'll see different perspectives from various talking heads about what America should do regarding the conflict that they see in Israel. And I'm sure that you're not following American media as much as you're following Israeli media, which also has its spectrum from left to right. But I'm curious to know also, what is it that you want from Americans? What is it that you want the government of America to do and the administration as an Israeli? What is it that you want Jews in America to understand that perhaps they're not seeing expressed on television? And I'd like for you also, if you can, to talk a little bit about what's happened in cities like Lod and then Ramla and then Haifa, cities and communities where there was coexistence or seeds of coexistence, and then there were explosions of not just bombs and Molotov cocktails, but of Arab-Israeli conflict within these centers and what that's meant, and you know the violence that's being perpetrated by Jews against Arabs and violence perpetrated by Arabs against Jews, and tell us a little bit of what you're seeing there too.
I'm trying to put an order to your questions, and the first question was, what do we expect from the American administration or the American Jewish community? And I must say, the very and you will help me on translate it. I must say that the Pirkei Avot, Im ein ani li mili. You want to?
If I am not for myself, who will be for me?
וכשאני לעצמי, מי אני?
But if I'm only for myself, then what am I? Who am I?
I want you to know that we're strong. I want you to know that our resilience and our ability to look forward to the future, raise children and grandchildren, is our strength. I want you to know that doing it without your sympathy, attentiveness, care, while it's possible, it is very hard. I want your administration to understand that the complexity of the Middle East is something that even if you live here for so long, it is hard to understand. Because what I tried to say at the beginning is that terrorist organizations like ISIS, like Hamas, like Hezbollah, their vision is to go after Israel and just throw us into the sea. Now, do you think that once Israel will be demolished, God forbid, they will be done? Of course not. They will go after their own people as they did in the past. Those who are not religious enough for that. Because terrorist organizations are there to cause troubles. And sometimes, and a lot of times in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they wrap it with a cellophane, with a wrapping paper, which looks to the world very appealing. The equation is unfair. Israel is strong. Israel is occupying us. Fact, we're not occupying Gaza for many years now. Fact, we're transferring money and electricity and foods to Gaza while they could get it all from Egypt. They have a border, a long border with Egypt. Fact, they're using the money that the international community is supporting them to build ammunition and underground cities to attack Israel. Monte Carlo would have been a pearl near the diamond that Gaza could be if all the money that was invested by the international community would go to build hotels and clean the streets there. So when your administration is saying, well, that's enough. Let's have a ceasefire. You've done enough. I understand their position. I totally understand. But also, I think the modesty should say, we don't really understand what is happening there. The fact that we managed to sign the Abraham agreements with the Emirates is not a big deal. We had relationship with the Emirates for decades. Not formal and not on the surface, but we had them. Now go make peace with a terrorist organization, either Hezbollah in the north or Hamas in the south, or the brothers, the Islamic brothers in the south. Organizations that neither of the Arab regimes in any of the Arab states surrounding Israel or anywhere in the Middle East wouldn't let them raise their heads more than a second. But Israel is always judged with a very, very tough and in many ways unfair approach. So I would just ask the American administration to understand how complex is the situation, how complicated things are, how our vision as Westerners that problems always have a solution, if not today, tomorrow, is not true when it comes to the Middle East. Just not true. The uprights within Israel. The uprights within Israel have much more reasons than the ones that you would like to have or understand that come from terrorist organizations surrounding Israel. And that has to do with years of neglect, budgets that needed to go to the Arabs more than they have, but also the conflict that the Israeli Palestinians have between their identity as Palestinian Israelis and Palestinian Arabs. And this is very, very complex. We at our office have an Arab worker from Ramleh. Now, the uprights in Ramleh were very, very minor, if at all. It's a city nearby Lod, where the uprights were very strong, very inflammable. And yesterday was a general strike in the Arab sector of Israel. And our worker, whom we love and admire and support and tzedakah and anything you can think that one would do to support a worker, we do for her, but she didn't show up at work with all kind of excuses which we knew are just fake, but I accepted that. Why did I accept that as the executive director of the synagogue? Because I understand the conflict that this woman is being at by sharing on one hand good relationship with her Israeli Jewish employers and her own identity as a Palestinian Arab who lives in Israel. And the conflict is not going to be solved by budgets or anything that can take them out of poverty or things like that. It is a question of identity, which, as one who lived in the United States for 4 years and saw how well the Jews are integrated at all avenues of society, I don't really understand why it's not the same thing for the Palestinian Israelis who live in Israel. I just don't understand why they don't accept themselves as a minority whose benefit from living in a Western country in the Middle East is so good. I just don't understand it yet. Because if they would have reached the point, like any minority in the United States, enjoying the benefits and the ladder of success and opportunities, they would be there. Sooner or later, they will be there. But in so many ways, they're trying to imitate what's happening in the countries surrounding Israel and behave in a way that is unacceptable. Now, do I forget the fact that there are Israeli Jewish mob that were acting disgustingly on our side? Of course I don't forget it. Every society has its margins, and Israeli Jews have their margins too. I'm not happy about it. But I don't think that's the real reason for what happened. The real reason is the conflict of the Israeli Arabs, the Israeli Palestinians, between their identity as a minority in the country, in the state of Israel, and their identification with them being Arabs in an area which is dominant by the Arab heritage and countries.
So, Nir, with the few minutes that we have left, and you see in the chat some of the frustration that those of us who see American media are attending to when we say, wait, we know that there's another side to this, but we're not seeing it expressed on CNN, or we're not seeing it expressed in the pages of whatever newspaper or magazine that we may. And there's a frustration that I think we all feel. I think that given all of the complexity and the challenges that you've expressed so well today, dealing with the fact that there are among Hamas in Gaza this vision of wanting Israel's destruction, and yet at the same time we know that there are a very significant number of Palestinians in the various different territories who don't subscribe to Hamas's philosophy and would love to have peace. And we know that there are Israelis that similarly wish for peace. And there are also Israelis that don't want peace, that have a radical maximalist view as well. And the complexities are so enormous. I was having lunch today, and we were obviously talking about what was going on, and between salad and salmon, offering our prayers for you. It was asked me, is there any hope for peace? Is there any hope that this isn't going to be just a cycle that we see repeating itself again and again and again, and the stalemate will continue and lives will be lost, and you will pass down your PTSD to another generation who also will have their traumatic experiences that you grew up with and have experienced? Is there a way to break the cycle? Is there anything that gives you hope that your grandchildren will not have the challenges that our generation faces?
I think that 11:55 at night, I can think of three ways to address your dilemma. First one is being Jewish. And by me choosing to be Jewish in Israel, not just Jewish because I was born Jewish, but to choose life as a Jewish person in Israel, praying 3 times a day, עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל. He who makes peace in the heavens will make peace on Israel and on every human being. Of course I have hope. This is in my tradition. Who am I? A schlepper in a long history of Jewish tradition that seeks for peace even when they were in the chambers? Of course we have hope. Israel is one of the strongest nations in the world. Israel is one of the most sophisticated and advanced countries that one can think of. Is one of the most liberal ones when it comes to the attitude towards LGBTQ in Tel Aviv. So of course I have hope. I have hope, I have a belief. If you ask my secular friends, some of them will just want to live their lives. They won't give themselves the meaningful questions like, who am I? Why do I face this? What is there to do to change the situation? No, just ignore it. I mean, most of us lives most of our life with much of ignorance. And the third option, one was to believe, the second one was to ignore, and the third one is what I chose to do as a professional. And this is to do. This is to work nights and days, along with my staff and volunteers, to change the face of Earth to the better. And that means to not give up on the hope, I would like to use the word in Hebrew, hatikva, which is also our national anthem, for a peaceful Israel living in coexistence with our neighbors. Do I believe in that? It's not a question. I'm going to work towards that within my community and with the community surrounding me. Our last staff retreat was in Jasser Azarka because it was important to me that we, the leading group of 1,000 family congregation, will visit an Arab town which is very underprivileged on the coast near Caesarea. Jasser Azarka was a whole day retreat that we took our staff to. Why? Because I believe in fixing the things. And I believe that I will start fixing the things tomorrow morning. At 2 a.m. the ceasefire will start, and by 8 a.m. we'll do something to repair the world. So between belief, ignorance, and, just work hard as much as we can, each one of us can. Each one of us can. Each individual that is on the screen right now can support us in our work or support yourself in that making the Palestinian Israelis and the Israelis closer. Yes, we have to start tomorrow morning all over again. Is it frustrating? Of course it is. Is it hard? Of course it is. Am I happy? No. So what? I'm not privileged to stop the work. I chose this work for myself. I can't ignore it.
I'm reminded of the passage from Pirkei Avot, Lo alecha amlecha ligmor velo ata ben charin lihibatel mimena, that none of us are able to finish the work, but neither are we free to desist from it.
I want to add one thing, Rabbi Dan.
Sure, of course.
Dr. Rabbi. I want to say, I want to answer Morris. But I want to answer Morris if anyone wants to see the question on the chat. I want to answer Morris from another perspective. And Morris states, if I understand right, how can we accept the Palestinian Arabs who do not accept Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state? First, 95% of them do. I'm talking about Israeli Arabs. I'm not talking about Arabs in the West Bank and the Gaza. 95% of Israeli Arabs accept the fact, maybe because they don't have another chance, accept the fact that Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. When they need to come to the Supreme Court, they will go to Jerusalem. When they need to attend the Knesset, the parliament, they'll go to Jerusalem. When they need to go to any of the authorities which are stationed in Jerusalem, they'll come there. And by the way, when they need to go to the American embassy, they also have to go to Jerusalem right now. And I'm saying it very positively. On the other hand, and this is very important to understand as a liberal Israeli, liberal Jew in Israel, a Reform rabbi in Israel. And I want to divide my career for two periods, the first 10 years and the second 10 years. I'm far from being a DD. I didn't die, but not because I served 25 years. I want to divide my period in this field for two. And the first 10 years, and this is a vivid memory, like some of our friends on the chat wrote about their lunch in Sderot. It's a vivid memory that anything that someone says about me, from, of course, the more conservative religious Jews in Israel, I would look behind my shoulder, as I do now, to look who said it and how can I respond to it. And the second part, the last 10 years, I don't look behind my shoulder anymore. Meaning, we are successful because we do our work with a belief and a vision, and we take our people to the destination that we think we should all be at. And that goes back, Morris, to the same question about Jerusalem. So let's imagine there are 200,000 Palestinian Israelis who do not accept Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So what? Do I have to respond to them? Do I have to be in the same dialogue or negotiating table with them? No, I don't. I choose not to, not because I'm weak or strong. I choose to promote my ideas and beliefs and vision in a way that not every disruption gets me off the way. So they said that. My grandparents, my grandmother is a 6th generation Jerusalemite. I'm an 7 or 8 generation Jerusalemite. My grandfather came from Hungary. He was a Holocaust survivor, but he from time to time used to use Yiddish phrases. And there is a beautiful Yiddish phrase which I currently don't remember. Excuse me. And this Yiddish expression in translation to English says, "So they said." In Yiddish, everything sounds more romantic and beautiful, right? So they said. So they said that I'm not Jewish. So they said that I'm Catholic. So they said that my community cannot exist. So they said that I'm not allowed to build. So they said. If I had to turn my head every time someone said something bad about me or my country or my denomination or being a Reform rabbi or being a boss or being in charge of 520 children in my day school, I probably would have spent too much time turning my hand backwards and not looking forward and leading my community to where it needs to be. So they said. At nights, those things come to me, but that's another discussion.
Well, Nir, I love you so much, and I'm so grateful for you giving us so generously of your time so late at night. And hopefully, because we kept you up so late, you'll sleep very well all through the night and
Halevai.
be quiet for the next 2 hours, and the ceasefire will hold and peace will
Amen.
descend. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. May the Holy One grant a great peace on the land of Israel, on you and on us all. And from all of us across the miles to you, we wish you strength and resilience and safety. For those who want to support the good work of Kilat YOZMA, that does so much to enrich the Jewish lives of the people in Modi'in and environs, and in the state of Israel, you can look in the chat. There's a link there where you can click so that you can make a contribution. The work that we do together is sacred and holy. When you get your membership renewal and you see Project Hineni, that is the money that we send every year to Kilat YOZMA. So please make sure that you include that in your renewal for your synagogue membership. And again, we look forward next June when our congregation will be journeying back to Israel and we'll be spending Shabbat in Modi'in with you. Really, we send love and Erev Tov L'Shalom.
Laila Tov, thank you everybody, and all my love to you. Stay strong.